Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that nuclear missiles are sitting just 90 miles from your country. Not in some distant battlefield, not across an ocean, right next door. And now you have a choice. Do you attack? Or do you wait and hope the other side blinks first? It was October 1962. The United States had discovered Soviet nuclear missiles being installed in Cuba. Suddenly, the Cold War was no longer distant. It was sitting just beyond the American coast. In Moscow, another leader faced the same question. How far could he push before America pushed back? For 13 days, ships moved, missiles waited, and armies prepared. Behind closed doors, Kennedy and Khrushchev faced decisions that could change millions of lives. One wrong move could turn a confrontation into nuclear war. This was the Cuban Missile Crisis. And for 13 days, the world waited to see whether its two enemies would step back or take one step too far. To understand why those missiles appeared in Cuba, we have to go back a few years. In 1959, Fidel Castro's revolution overthrew Cuba's old government and brought a new leadership to power. At first, Washington did not know exactly what Cuba would become. But that changed quickly. Castro moved closer to the Soviet Union, while relations with the United States grew colder. Then, in April 1961, American-backed forces attempted to overthrow Castro at the Bay of Pigs. The invasion failed, and its failure changed the balance of the Cold War. Castro now had a powerful reason to fear another American attack. Khrushchev saw an opportunity. If Soviet nuclear missiles were placed in Cuba, they could protect Castro's government while giving Moscow a strategic position much closer to the United States. From Cuba, Soviet missiles could reach major American cities in minutes. And there was another calculation. America already had nuclear missiles positioned near the Soviet Union, including missiles in Turkey. So Khrushchev could now threaten America from close range, while quietly changing the nuclear balance. To Washington, however, there was a much simpler reality. A Soviet nuclear arsenal was being built just 90 miles from the American coast, and America did not know how far Moscow intended to take it. The answer came from the sky. On October 14, 1962, an American U-2 spy plane flew over Cuba. Its cameras captured something Washington had not expected to see: long, narrow launch sites, construction crews, missile equipment, and weapons capable of carrying nuclear warheads. At first, the photographs were simply evidence. Then, American intelligence studied them more closely. These were not ordinary military installations. The Soviet Union was building nuclear missile sites on the island. The next day, the photographs reached President John F. Kennedy. He had been warned that Soviet weapons might be coming to Cuba, but seeing them was different. Now there was proof, and the question changed. It was no longer, are the Soviets trying to strengthen Cuba? It became, how do we stop them? Kennedy's advisors understood the danger immediately. An attack could destroy the missiles, but it could also kill Soviet personnel. And if Soviet soldiers died under American bombs, Moscow might retaliate. The United States had discovered the missiles, but discovering them was only the beginning. Now Kennedy had to decide what to do next. Kennedy now faced a problem with no safe answer. American forces could destroy the missile sites with airstrikes, then prepare for an invasion of Cuba. It was fast, powerful, and dangerous. A strike might kill Soviet troops on the island. If Moscow answered with force, the crisis could spread beyond Cuba. Another option was diplomacy, but asking Khrushchev to remove the missiles offered no guarantee he would listen. There was also a third choice: do nothing. That might avoid confrontation, but it would leave Soviet nuclear weapons close to American territory. Inside the White House, Kennedy and his advisors debated these choices. Then they considered something between attack and inaction, a naval quarantine. American warships would stop further offensive weapons from reaching Cuba. It would not remove the missiles already there, but it would buy time. And time was exactly what Kennedy needed. On October 22nd, Kennedy went on national television and told Americans what had been discovered. The United States would prevent further offensive weapons from reaching Cuba. But he also made something clear: America was prepared to respond if those missiles were used. The Soviet Union had placed nuclear weapons in Cuba, and American warships were moving to stop them. And now, the whole world was watching.
Москва следит за действиями флота. All eyes are on the Caribbean tonight.
On October 24, 1962, the quarantine began. American warships formed a line around Cuba. Beyond them, Soviet ships were approaching. For the first time, the crisis had moved from secret photographs and private meetings to a direct confrontation at sea. Everyone was watching. If a Soviet ship carrying offensive weapons refused to stop, the Americans would have to decide what came next, and that decision could change everything. Then something unexpected happened. Some Soviet ships slowed down. Others turned back. For a moment, the immediate collision seemed to have been avoided. But the missiles already inside Cuba were still there, and Khrushchev was not simply giving up. Messages moved between Washington and Moscow. One seemed firm, another sounded more willing to negotiate. Kennedy had to read between the lines while avoiding a move that might make the situation worse. Meanwhile, American forces were preparing for the possibility that diplomacy would fail. Aircraft were ready, ships were positioned, troops were on alert. The world did not know how this would end, and neither did the men making the decisions. Every hour mattered, every message mattered. Every movement of a ship could be misunderstood. Then the crisis became even more dangerous. On October 26th, Khrushchev sent a message suggesting that the Soviet Union might remove the missiles if the United States promised not to invade Cuba. But the next day, another message arrived. This time, the demand was harder. The United States would also have to remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey. Now Kennedy faced an even more difficult choice. He could accept, he could refuse, or he could risk pushing the Soviet leader too far. The 13 days were becoming a test of patience, calculation, and restraint, and the most dangerous moment had not yet arrived. October 27th became known as the darkest day of the crisis. An American U-2 reconnaissance plane was shot down over Cuba. The pilot was killed that day. Was this an attack ordered by Moscow, or had the situation slipped beyond Khrushchev's control? Kennedy's advisors pushed for retaliation, but the president resisted military response because there was another danger. American forces were preparing for action, while Soviet troops in Cuba were also armed. If the United States attacked the missile sites, Soviet commanders might respond before Moscow could stop them. Then came another frightening moment. A Soviet submarine carrying a nuclear torpedo was being pressured by American naval forces to surface. The Americans did not know what it carried, and the Soviet crew did not know whether war had already begun. Inside that submarine, the officers faced a decision with unimaginable consequences. They could launch the nuclear weapon, or they could wait. They waited. That decision mattered, because the crisis was no longer about Kennedy and Khrushchev. It was about whether people inside military commands could keep a dangerous situation from becoming irreversible. Meanwhile, Kennedy's advisors continued to argue. Some wanted immediate action. Others feared that one attack could trigger a chain reaction neither superpower could control. For 13 days, both sides had been trying to calculate the other's intentions. Now, they were discovering the frightening truth. In a nuclear crisis, you do not need someone to want war. You only need one terrible mistake, and the world had come close. By October 28, 1962, the pressure had become too great. Kennedy and Khrushchev both understood what was at stake. Neither side wanted nuclear war, but neither could afford to look weak. Then came the message from Moscow. Khrushchev agreed to remove the Soviet missiles from Cuba. In return, the United States publicly promised not to invade Cuba. The immediate crisis was ending, but there was another part of the agreement that remained largely private. America also agreed to remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey. They were already positioned close to the Soviet Union, so the final settlement was not simply a Soviet surrender. Both sides stepped back. The Soviet missiles would leave Cuba. The American missiles would eventually leave Turkey, and the United States would not invade Cuba. On October 28th, Khrushchev publicly announced that the Soviet Union would dismantle and remove the missiles. The ships would turn around. The missile sites would be dismantled, and the world could finally breathe again. But the 13 days had left behind something more important than a political victory. They had shown both superpowers just how easily a confrontation could move beyond their control. The crisis was over. The Cold War was not, and the lessons of those 13 days would follow both nations for years to come. The Cuban Missile Crisis ended in October 1962, but its warning did not. Kennedy and Khrushchev had seen how quickly fear, military pressure, and misunderstanding could push two nuclear powers toward disaster. Soon after the crisis, Washington and Moscow created a direct communication link between their leaders. The goal was simple. If another crisis came, they needed to be able to speak before events moved beyond control. But the nuclear arms race continued. The weapons remained. The rivalry remained. Only the understanding had changed. For 13 days, the world had watched two superpowers stand at the edge of something neither could safely control. And perhaps that is the most important lesson. Nuclear war did not come because everyone suddenly wanted it. It almost came because decisions, fear, and miscalculation can move faster than reason. If you enjoyed this journey through one of history's most dangerous moments, subscribe to Atlas of Empires, because history isn't just about the past, it's about the decisions that shape what comes next. We'll see you in the next empire.